Hi, welcome everybody to Getting Fit for the Future, setting up your L&D team to succeed in 2023. I'm Samantha with the marketing department here at Litmos, and we are really thrilled, as always, to welcome David Perrin, who's the director of research at our friends and partners over at Fosway Group. And we today are going to be talking about kind of where we are for this year. And I know there's been a lot of, doom and gloom, and we're going to talk about some of these bullets here in detail with David's research in regard to how do you get beyond doing more with less and sort of the mindset that you need to do this get fit for the future thing. And then how to be better aligned, more value focused as an L&D team, and how to prove and articulate that value. We're going to talk about how to create more effective, more efficient learning. You've heard it every which way, upside down and sideways forever, but we're going to hopefully give some new insights on efficiency and effectiveness. And then we're going to talk about the importance of skills right now and how, skill building is an essential piece for future survival. That sounds very doom and gloom, but we will address that. And then we'll offer some positive insights and some tips on how we think you can get there. So I think with that, I'll just hand it over to David as we go to the next slide.
I'll be able to maybe sprinkle some rays of sunshine. I'm sure you will as well during the session, because we've got quite a sort of punchy first slide here, really talking about, is it going to be a tough year? And sort of reflecting a little bit on what the economists say and where their head's at, right? We sort of pulled this conversation together over the last couple of weeks, and what was going on at that time was Davos and the World Economic Forum getting together, and they very rosily spoke about recession 2023. Is that going to affect us? Is a recession really coming or not? And their feedback from talking to a lot of economists was, it depends where you are. And I think maybe that's a little bit, it depends on where you are in the market space, but also where you are in the world. And this is just their summary, right? And I tried to pull it together. And what's interesting is they speak about two dimensions, and what do chief economists think, either about the risks of weak economic growth or the risk of high inflation. And sort of working our way down from the top, it wasn't looking so rosy in Europe, right? We've still got some major issues in the region, and they thought, economic growth is going to be weak. All of them thought that, and just over half said, well, we can probably expect higher inflation than we're used to. Fingers crossed that's going to level out. But also in the US, right? So 9 out of 10 were thinking weak economic growth, and maybe 1 in 4 were thinking, maybe you're going to get some high inflation. And as you go sort of maybe more east across the globe, actually in Southeast Asia, it looks as though that was going to be a boom part of the world. And there was just this sort of sense of, actually, when they spoke to the economists, 60%, around 63% expect a global recession in 2023. Now, that was off the sort of maybe some of the tech headaches with people being laid off from some really big brands in the West Coast US and globally. So I think Netflix laid people off, Meta were laying people off, Google were laying people off, and the significant numbers, right? And I think that put some jitters through the economy from that economics viewpoint. But it just makes you think, okay, so there is this sort of changing lens around, so what's going to happen to our budgets if the times get tough? So that's one thing. So the economists are sort of maybe saying it's going to be a difficult year ahead.
And David, I was going to jump in and mention that you were sort of indicating, all the layoffs in the U.S. And I do live in the U.S. In the great state of Arizona, and some really positive news just came out. Just the January jobs report that was all over the news here in the U.S., which was remarkably positive. There were over 500,000 new jobs.
Wow.
And this is
That's just incredible.
Just the January report. And it was, it absolutely blew out of the water all the predictions that had been made. And in fact, I had made a note to myself that we actually just reached the lowest unemployment rate since May of 1969, which And it is true what you were saying about the tech sector, that they were, I should say I work in the tech sector, got hit really hard, but some of these other industries are really just trucking along. So that's positive.
Marketplace, it's not as though their skills aren't in demand.
Yeah.
People are hungry for those sorts of skills. And it's interesting, right? So you got this almost view of the economist having a sense of looking back and looking forward and maybe being pessimistic. The reality is on the ground being maybe a little bit different. And being there, that maybe that rare sunshine peeking through from a difficult couple of years. But it's interesting, there's some research, and this is what I want to go through next, from PwC that they just released in the last couple of weeks. And it's almost they call it a CEO survey. And it's really interesting because, again, I won't get too much of a downer, right? When you track back CEOs' expectations about is economic going to grow or is it going to decline, that sort of perspective from the CEO has never been more pessimistic, right? In the last 11 years since they've been running this survey. And you just think, okay, that's a really interesting mindset. So people aren't thinking there's going to be a lot of money slushing around. But what's fascinating, right, is that their research also showed that CEOs have already started to cut costs around that, but only 19% are implementing hiring freezes, and only 16% are expecting to reduce their workforce. So it really speaks to that, what you were talking about, the sort of maybe the jobs market is still really buoyant. The demand for labor and skills is still really high.
Yeah, and although I will say, figuring out this chart, I felt like I was riding some kind of roller coaster, just trying to follow the lines of reality here. And when you see the dips and the spikes, it is fascinating to see, that in certain parts of the economy, or certain industries, sure, there's, again, to refer to tech, there are major sort of upheavals going on, but that's not necessarily straight across the board. And this slide demonstrates that there's nothing straight across the board.
It's interesting, right? 2019, we know what happened. People were still optimistic. Then the pandemic hit and we're pessimistic. And then the vaccine kicks in, and then we're sort of things start to return to normal-ish, and hopes are high, and then supply chains are making life a little bit harder. But what's interesting when you dig into a little bit more, I suppose you sort of get into this mindset now. So should you be thinking about cutting cost? Should you be thinking about doing more with less as a learning function? And what I want to do is just go through some more of that CEO thinking to say maybe that, yes, you need to think about efficiency, but you shouldn't be necessarily thinking about cost cutting, because actually maybe it's a time to invest more in learning. And maybe there's a lot of opportunities in terms of CEOs' priorities to say, yeah, that's what we should be doing. And I think what you said about the economy in terms of the jobs market and 500,000 new jobs, right? I think that's a lot of demand for people who maybe aren't interested in moving or don't necessarily have the skills that you want as well. So 2 slides or 2 charts, and I think they tell a story, right? The first is CEOs say that in 10 years' time, that they were asked, if your company continues running on its current path, so doing the same thing, how long do you think your business will be economically viable? So do you think your business will still exist in 10 years' time if you keep on doing the same thing as you do now? And globally, it's 40% say, yeah, in 10 years' time, if we do not change, we will not exist as a company. We'll cease to trade. So there is this pressure around innovation. If you look at that from a UK and US point of view, maybe we're ahead of the curve on some of the innovation in Europe as well, because I think some of the numbers are more like 20 and 25%. But overall, it's really interesting, right? This whole sense, and this is sort of winning today's race while running tomorrow's is the title of their report. But this sense of, so we need to innovate. We really need to change. And the things that are sort of driving this come back to what you said, Sam. There's 2 things that stand out, right? So changing customer demand will be a reason that we wouldn't exist. Skills and labor shortages, and this is where people have said to a large extent or very large extent will be an influencer. Things around technology and technology innovation and automation. So you bring all those things together, and suddenly it's okay. I should be asking myself, how is what I'm doing as an L&D function supporting or understanding how our customers are changing their demand? What is it about my L&D function which is helping me understand the labor and skill shortages in my organization and whether we should be growing them internally or creating a great value proposition that attracts people to work for us as well? What's going to make people stay and retain them in our organization? So I think that's a really interesting one. And again, just to go through this a little bit more, because I think it's such an interesting report. 2 more slides or 2 more charts. And they say, which is the following best options describe any actions your company is considering to mitigate the economic challenges of the next 12 months? And people are looking at this reduce operating costs, right? That's not the top one, as we said. That's one that people are already doing this in yellow. In red, it's things that people are considering doing in the next 12 months. So yeah, we're thinking about another third are thinking about reducing operating costs. If you go down the list, right, so that probably makes us think we probably should be thinking about how we can increase our efficiency and reduce our costs as a learning team. That's probably a right thing to do. But when you go down and look and say, implementing hiring freezes, there's only 19%. Look at reducing the workforce, only 15%. So this demand for skills, this demand for talent is really high. And when you ask the question about, so which of the following investments is your company going to make in the next 12 months? Because that's where the money is from an L&D point of view. And how much of that is in red, preserving current business, or in yellow, helping reinvent the business for the future. The top 3 are really interesting to me, right? So automating processes and systems. That's the number one where people are investing. So if you're thinking about increasing the automation in around L&D, that's a good thing to do around HR processes. That's an expectation, especially if it's helping you build the business for the future. So what can you do around skills, for example? And the second one about upskilling the company's workforce in priority areas. And these are almost, I think, sort of, probably the key area. So that's, for most people, about reinventing the business for the future as much as it is about preserving current business. So the question you need to ask yourself again is, what upskilling does my workforce need in what priority areas? If you don't know the answer to that question, you need to be going out and talking to your leaders to actually find that out through really strong business partnering, really strong performance consulting, and business consulting, just to ask those questions, because that's where the money will appear for you if your budgets are starting to get pinched, or if your budgets aren't getting pinched, where you'll get even more investment to do what you need to do. People have investment, as you can see, to fulfill those things. And on top of that, just this sense of actually deploying technology, that's where people are also investing. So all the tech skills that we're after, we probably should be thinking about growing those internally from now for the short term. That's for nearly half, and then for the future, which is beyond half. So I think, again, getting inside your CEO's head now, if you haven't had a conversation with your CEO or your C-suite, I reckon that's probably one of the first places you should be going now, right? In the next month, go and talk about the plans for the coming year. Start to connect to some of those initiatives and some of that thinking, because that will help ring-fence you, maybe defend you a little bit against any cost-cutting and the cost efficiencies that do exist in the system.
Yeah, and I love that you have these top 2 things on the rightward chart, that you have these 2 things circled. And for me, I think this is really positive if you think about grouping those things together. And you know that those are the leading percentages in this bar chart. That if you think about automating from a learning perspective, and of course I come from the learning, the e-learning world at Litmos, but you know, the idea of automating processes and systems will hopefully part of the second row, hopefully the upskilling piece of this chart, that you're using the automation and you're leveraging technology in order to make that goal of upskilling way easier and way more automated, rather than, you know, trying to manually, you know, go around and upskill and reskill and do all that stuff that companies are doing right now. I mean, when you combine these 2 things, that's going to make your 2023 a lot easier.
It's interesting, right? If I go back and look at some of the more innovative corporates, more innovative organizations, what they've been doing is thinking about how they create a faster flow of people within the organization to new roles and new responsibilities. How do they grow and help target people with this is the great fit for you, both in terms of your aspirations and direction of travel, in terms of your career, and where you need to build your skills to be even more employable than you used to be. And I think that's super exciting, right? Because that's part of that automation. It's like, how do you connect workers with great work? And not only great work, but work that they're really interested in, things that they really aspire to do, because that releases a hell of a load more energy and excitement and enthusiasm and releases loads of discretionary effort for you as an organization as well. So there's some really nice virtual circle things. And what's interesting, right, in that third item, I probably should have extended that green box down a little bit, that green circle down into deploying technology, cloud, AI, other advanced tech. Some of the things that are helping drive reskilling and targeting and the automation assistance is the AI, right? It's enabling to create faster matches. So there's almost this sort of inside out. We can provide this as part of the employee experience and deliver the sort of outcomes the CEOs think are important for their business to survive in the short term and the long term as well. And I think that's one of the maybe the key takeaways of sort of getting in that mindset. So I think we've got a poll now just to get some interaction from our audience and get some feedback about what they think as well. So I think we've got Alex spitting some things up for us.
Yeah. Are we allowed to vote? Can I vote? I don't know if I'm allowed.
I want to vote.
I want to vote too. I'm gonna vote. Oh, let's see. Ooh.
Oh, can.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I voted.
Yeah, I voted as well. So I'm not. Do we know where the results come through from? Or is that something?
Hopefully, our backup team here can
share.
Let's give it a second, and then I'm sure our team with our producing team can launch those results for us. I sure hope so. We need to have something to analyze. I'm curious to see the results.
Me too. So I assume Alex and Taylor can help us share those back to everybody. Oh, here they come.
Here we go. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, team. Wow. Okay, so if you add it in the chat, I didn't see that pop up. I'm curious to see that, but or if don't be shy. But that's interesting. I happen to vote for that cost cuts piece as well. Okay, some people are changing or it looks like more votes are coming in. Let's give it just 1 second. See those coming into the chat. Okay, so please allow your votes to come in if our producing team hasn't turned the poll off yet. Keep voting. But I guess not that surprisingly, David, that the big winners here, and by winners we mean losers, are cost cuts at 32% right now, and layoffs. Oh, and that just changed, so the numbers are shifting a little bit. But those are the big. Ooh, recession starting to catch up. Okay.
The maturity of different market sectors, the pace of innovation is a challenge, and I think if you are feeling your budgets sort of maybe under pressure, there is budget outside of L&D, and actually the opportunity to try and find the sales partner, the customer services partner, the technology partner within your organization, that stakeholder who leads those part of those budgets. They may have some really interesting targets that they're trying to realize. So if you can help them achieve their targets, then you are somebody who can bring that halo and help them on their way as well. People are looking for help. So find out what some of the antidotes are. I think, and your stakeholders will be able to tell you what their plans, what their executions are.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so hopefully that's something that sort of helps people along. And Leslie's just said here, we're hiring people but not giving them resources to complete the mission. I think that's one of the interesting things, right? How you sort of almost provide people with resources, and that may require some investment. But that's also for us to try and get hold of data that enables us to influence our stakeholders around making some of those investments
Yep.
wherever you can.
And I really liked Mark's comment in
Yeah.
the chat as well. This is just a really clever response and true, but
Yeah.
basically growth and cost cuts tap dance
Yeah.
is upon us. And what a great metaphor, because yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like you're supposed to, this is the do more with less.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to innovating, right? I think that when we get put into these more challenging situations, that's when we have to think about doing things differently. And quite often we get permission to do things differently as well. And maybe it's a spark of creativity, isn't it, to help us move forward. So in the spirit of positivity, I think what we should do is move on, and we'll talk about some of the things that we've started to highlight as opportunities. So thinking about this sort of how do L&D get fit for the future? And when we talked about doing this session, it was very timely that it was the start of the year, because we sort of thought, actually, it's a bit like making a New Year's resolution. I'm sure I put my hand up and say, yeah, I was supposed to be getting fitter this year as I was in the previous year and the year before that and the year before that and the year before that. Not that I've enrolled in a gym. I've just managed, yeah, so that's a different story. But that there's so much opportunity for us to say, okay, we've got to make some change. We've got to maybe take ourselves forward. A lot of the thing that enables us to get there is not the resources. It's actually the mindset that enables us to get and grapple with the challenges that face us. One of the things that we've been talking about Fosway for a while is this sense of, so what does make L&D fit for the future? What is the mindset thinking that maybe we can challenge ourselves around and reflect ourselves around? So what are we doing? So some of this comes down to agile thinking, and that's just sort of taking that mindset of, in the agile world, we try to deliver value faster. We don't think about an end product, we evolve our product. So that's an interesting mindset. So what are you doing from an L&D point of view or a learning point of view to say, we don't have to maybe start with a complete solution. We will iterate, we will evolve the solution to help people on their way and fill out the pieces as we start to get feedback, and maybe think about what we can do faster, quickly, even just to get people launched into their learning path. The next one, just around being intelligence and data driven. What that really comes down to is actually what numbers do you have, and to hopefully business numbers that will help you really tune into the drivers and value add that you can offer the business, right? So that being that data driven is about, I suppose, really understanding what the priorities of the business are, what evidence you might need to gather to show you're making a difference. It may be even just understanding what's working within your learning portfolio, what are people faltering on, what's being really successful, what questions are they answering that they're finding it difficult to answer. All these things help you fine tune, but it sort of plays together, right? So it helps, the intelligence helps you prioritize, but also helps you make better decisions and influence your stakeholders as well. The other one around relationship focus is about, when we're thinking about learning, how can we drive people to maybe learn more from each other rather than wait to consume just content? And what is it that we do in terms of people's learning journeys or learning cycles that enables them to get input maybe from a peer, get feedback from a manager, take time working with others to motivate each other, especially in this sort of disconnected world where we're all doing things virtually quite often. So how do we make that relationship the focus of what we're trying to do rather than just the content? The next one, just intense in the sense of Uber customer experience. What we mean by that is, rather than standing in London, for example, on a rainy night after having an evening out in the rain, getting wet, trying to wave down a taxi that goes flying past that never stops, you just sit in the pub or the cafe, wherever you were, you order your Uber, you know where it is, you don't have to stand in the rain, you just run out to the Uber, and you don't even have to give them any money to get home, and they know exactly where to take you home because it's all in the deal, right? So rethinking the experience is really important, and I know, and there's things around that. Just sort of thinking of an example, right? So with sales training, actually getting salespeople to record their sales pitch and play that back to others, right? It's an amazing opportunity for feedback, rehearsal, practice, and enable you to polish. So that's sort of rethinking the experience of, oh, we had to get everybody together, or we can't really do that. You can do loads of amazing things in that way.
We at Litmos call that in our platform, we call it video assessments, and it's a powerful capability in that, exactly as you say, David. A salesperson can record themselves doing whatever, a pitch, a demo, what have you, and then upload that, and then they can not only review it themselves, they can get manager feedback, and then there's also an AI capability, which is, however you have it configured to not say certain words, to say certain words, to count the number of ums and ahs and all that are in there. So there is an AI sort of analysis feature as well, which is really powerful when you think about learning, sort of, learning on the job, learning in the flow, whatever we want to call it. But I mean, that stuff right now is just incredibly, powerful and getting better and better.
It's agile thinking, because you're saying, actually, show me what you know now. Best pitch, right? The AI is starting to do an element of assessment straight off the bat. So these are some of the keywords you didn't use. This is some of the things. This is how I'd rate you just off the bat, right? Without even sending it on somebody else that might expose you around, oh, I didn't really quite know that as well as I should, or those sorts of things. But also then the opportunity to share that with somebody who can then invest some time with you, right? Be that a manager, subject matter expert, a peer, that relationship focus of, these are the things that I find, these phrases are the things that I find work, right? Now, you haven't had to design any program other than get people to show that they know. And that's what we're sort of maybe thinking about in terms of that Uber experience, which almost sort of links on to that sense of energizing the workforce, because actually there's a lot of energy in providing feedback and supporting each other. Just to start things off.
Yeah, and it's just like you're saying, the Uber experience. It's the world we live in. I mean, most people are used to, just like looking at videos of themselves and looking at it, and but it's, especially, and I know we have a Gen Z slide coming up, but and of course it's not just younger people that use technology, because you and I do too. But it's a format that feels friendly. That Uber experience, where it's like I can interact with the world through a way that I feel comfortable through technology, which sounds like a little bit paradoxical, but not really, because everyone is so comfortable in that technology world now. It's like, well, why not make that part of how we interact even and how we learn?
Exactly. So these things start, I think, to add together. And then radical cost efficiency, I think that's something you always have to bring, right? It's something that the business expects you to be really efficient in what you do. It doesn't mean that you're going to spend less overall. It just means that we're trying to maximize the bang we get for our buck at every opportunity. And that means empowering maybe more people to contribute to learning, maybe letting people be a bit more hands-on and learn through doing. But ultimately, I think the key one is this sense of delivering exceptional value. And it's what we said a little bit before. If you understand the priorities of your business and priorities of your organization, actually it's easy to deliver exceptional value, because you are providing the biggest opportunity. And going back to the CEO concerns, help me automate, help me upskill, help me innovate the business. If you're too clued into those things, then you are providing that super step up in terms of both protecting the business in the future, but enabling it to deliver value now and maybe sell more, create better customer happiness, whatever it happens to be. So those are some of the dimensions, really. So if you've got your mindset, I think that does trigger some opportunities. We talk overall in terms of sort of knowing your stakeholder priorities and the value add. And it really is, I think, a little bit of operational efficiency. And you can get that through your learning management system, your processes, some of the automation that you offer there. But ultimately, that's going to be of a smaller level of value than providing performance and productivity support. So actually helping people navigate their challenges as a business or individuals, right? And so how do I sell this new product? Or our competitors are doing this. What's the best way for me now to position this particular sale? Providing that support will raise people's performance, but even those things aren't as big an influencer or provide a big an impact or value add as the strategic game changers. So the things that are going to change your world are going to be you shifting into new areas, right? So that could be new areas because of technology. Maybe it's more chatbots handling, or more effective chatbots handling your calls initially. Maybe it's about using AI to help understand the sorts of phrases that increase completion or completed sales and sales closing, all these things. Maybe it's about shifting market focus into maybe additive manufacturing, if you haven't heard of that. It's like 3D printers, printing with metal powder with lasers. It's incredible. Just think about one device prints something that was used to had to have been assembled for maybe 10, 20 devices. There were some really interesting things from India just before Christmas. They managed to 3D print a rocket engine and tested it. Right? It's like, how many parts would there be in a rocket engine that would need putting together and shipping together? So these strategic game changers enable you to sort of shift the market space. Those are the things that enable your organization to survive. So know what those are in your organization is really important.
And can I ask you this, before we go to the poll, can I ask you on
sure.
that, on your, that slide? So I was trying to make sure I understood this, that you are saying though, that you have to build from the foundation up, or in your upside down triangle, it sounds weird, but from the apex up, you can't just be on level 5. I mean, and I'm saying this from the Litmos perspective, because of course, like we really help organizations do, the level 1, 2, 3 up into 4. I don't know if I could speak to 5, but obviously learning management, automation, learning the workflow, performance, productivity, all innovation. But don't you have to have 1 through 4 if you're even going to consider going to 5?
The personal view, right, is that 5, if you connect with the business drivers in your organization that are so significant, they will be the catalyst that trigger 1, 2, 3, 4 as well. Now, it may take you on a bit more of a journey, but the funding for you to innovate will come through providing that strategic change.
Okay.
And there may be some dependencies, not necessarily every dependency. There may be some dependencies on innovating your learning practice. Maybe you've already innovated some of your learning practice, but really getting the value out of that, the biggest value is where you help the business go through the most significant transformation.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. I didn't fully understand this. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
But you can treat them as levels, right? But I think you can be more ambitious and think, do you know what? If we want to be the leader in vegetarian-based meat products, right? And they think that's going to be worth about 35 billion by 2035.
Yeah.
It's like huge, right?
Huge.
What would we need to do? And it's like, okay, we need to create a whole new level of manufacturing, a whole new layer of science. Actually, how are we going to get there? We need to hire a few people in, but maybe we can take our own people on that journey. Some of these lower levels will be part of delivering that transformation in your business, because everything's going to change if you're in it, depending on where you go.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay,
cool,
great.
So I'll skip on. So we've got a poll, just as a quick question. So here we go. So we got, what's the strongest value add this year? Is it about agile thinking and capabilities? Is it about data and intelligence? Is it about cost efficiency? Is it about stronger learner relationships? Well, we're only allowing you to choose one. That's customer experience, energizing your workforce, or something else to add to the chat. So this is maybe just an overall question. When we talk through this with sort of corporates more broadly, these sort of titles, it's almost sort of, where do you think you could get more value in terms of talking to your own L&D team and recalibrating what you do? It's probably one way of thinking about that. So I should choose one, shouldn't I? I'm going to choose my one. And I've submitted. Again, I'm really excited to see what people put through in the survey. And while we're waiting, I said, I love what Mark has written there in the chat. He says, in this economic environment, ROI becomes more critical than ever. Demonstrating your senior leaders the ROI of your L&D initiatives and how they align to you and accelerate your business priorities will help justify and uneven investment in L&D. And I totally endorse what Mark said. I think what you'll also find is actually it will potentially increase the investment that people put into your learning function as well. Not necessarily just for learning, but it may be a business priority which then will cross-fund into learning, be that we need to develop these new technology skills, etc. Cool. So Sam, which one did you choose?
I chose stronger learner relationships.
Yeah.
Nice. We have a big focus on that. That's, as far as the way the Litmos technology is built and some of the, personalization and custom. That for me resonated the most.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I love this one about the customer experience focus, almost run away with the results here.
Yeah.
Again, I think that's really important, because I think there's two conversations I'd recommend around that. One is with your stakeholders, the others is with your end workers, for want of a better phrase, because they will tell you what is important to them. One that I ticked off, right, and maybe I'm a little bit of an outlier, was the data and intelligence, because I think one thing that's really important for us, going back to what Mark said, is to provide the evidence, right, and use the evidence as a call to action. And that's why working with stakeholders is so important. So when a stakeholder says, yeah, we've got targets for increasing sales by 300%. So far this year, we've only managed to hit half that target, right? Digging into the evidence of why will be able to be part of the challenge of, well, actually people don't understand our products enough. We've got the evidence that shows us this. Those who have a higher understanding of our products sell more. This is what gathering that evidence, I think, is really important. So sort of using that customer focus to get to, I think what Toyota used to call Kaizen, it's like get to the source, get to the source of the problem. Is really important. And apologies if Kaizen isn't the right word.
Two comments to that, David. First of all, I'm absolutely shocked that an analyst liked the data and intelligence answer. Wait a second, a research analyst voted for that one? Okay. But further to that, all kidding aside, this has also been, one of the really scary things to L&D people. And I've just heard this, anecdotally with customers, that it's sort of the holy grail of like, well, we're really good at building training and we're really good at, building these great training programs, but the tracking and the data and the intelligence and the ROI, as Mark was commenting, is really tough. So we understand that, and we at Litmos are trying to make that easier, but I don't know if you have other insights into that of how to, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but just it's a tough thing.
I think we can talk through that and skip through these things, because I think ultimately, actually just what Mark said about reporting, articulating your value add is really important. And there's so much data in businesses now, right? It's difficult not to find a minutiae of detail around business data. Ultimately, whether that's around team, strategy, service, company, results, profitability, business process efficiency, quality, excellence in process, sustainability targets, customer advocacy, all these things have some sort of metrics, whether that's the team's skills profile and how much that's grown, whether it's the team's ability, levels of engagement, teams' retention levels, how quickly you're churning through people to leave the business, how much the organization is taking advantage of strategic opportunities, right? These are measurable things that you can get feedback from stakeholders around. Quality of service, right? And even the thing around the company profitability. I heard of an organization who have outbound telephone sales. They are tracking using AI, every conversation that one of their agents has with a customer. They're profiling the sort of language that's being used to use as a coaching feedback to say, if you shorten your sentences, if you use less of this sort of phrase and more of this phrase, you will increase your sales. They're even using that to help filter out candidates who want to apply for those sorts of jobs. So this sort of sense of the data exists, and we can start to correlate. But a lot of that depends on how closely you are to your stakeholder, because some of those business systems will need your stakeholder to unlock to create the link between what learning has happened and what business results are happening. So that's really cool. But I think there's a lot of data. And if you don't know the data of your own learning effectiveness, then probably the business is going to look at you in a strange way. But also just, I think, in terms of this sort of sense of transformation in businesses, actually there's some really predictable drivers for training, which is where you might want to drive some efficiency, but also think about effectiveness. If you're involved in new systems training, new product training, new markets training, that could be around related to sustainability. If you're thinking about new innovations, new technologies, all of these things are typically part of a transformation project, a transformation office. So sometimes your best partner in the entire organization is the transformation and IT project office, who are governing what things land when. So if you're not hearing it directly from the stakeholder, the other way of catching it is through that project office, which is saying our next priority is the use of AI in call filtering or outbound call sales, right? That's where you'll spot it. And all these innovations don't tend to be one thing. They tend to be a combination. So when you address a new market, actually it tends to mean that you've got some new products, and there's going to be some new processes and systems, and you may have to reorientate people into doing those jobs as well. So this becomes part of that sort of building new capability, building new skills for the future. So this was my sort of checklist when I used to work in learning, to say, who's got some new compliance? I'm going to hunt you down and say, how do you want to train this? Who's got some real issues around license to operate? Who needs to have certification to make sure that we're managing our risk and making sure things happen? Who's got some real performance gaps? Those things start to come out with conversation with stakeholders is really important. And that will drive outcomes for you in a really positive way. So the other thing, just in terms of this sort of agile mindset, just in terms of delivering faster, some of that is just this sort of mindset of you don't wait until you've got the entire built car to say to the customer, which is the person who's in that sort of smiley face, this is what I've done for you, right? And I think quite often with L&D, we get into this thing of, it's going to take us 3 months to develop the course. And that's going to be a push. And sometimes we're supposed to have delivered the course 3 months ago because we didn't get involved in the project set. One of the things that I think is really interesting from Henrik Knyberg is this sense of minimum viable product. So what can I give you now that enables you to accelerate and move things along? So they sort of say, well, we'll start with a skateboard, then we'll maybe turn it in from a skateboard into a scooter, and we can give you a bike. But every point, they've got actually a usable iteration, something useful to help in their journey to get to the shops, so to speak, right? And by the time you get to the 5th iteration, it is a car, but we took you on a bit of a journey, and every time we were providing value. Now, one interesting thing is, actually, maybe they didn't even need a scooter. If we just gave them a bus ticket, maybe they could have got to where they wanted. And maybe that was the ultimate viable product. And I think there's something in that, in what we see with learning content. Sometimes...
David, I was going to go back just for 1 second on the minimal viable product, the MVP analogy. Is that I think this is really key guidance for companies who are just starting out with an e-learning project. And I'm always a little bit shocked because I live in the e-learning world, but for companies that really they're just dipping their first toe in the water, is that you don't need to, I think this analogy eliminates or reduces the intimidation factor of, like, you don't need to start out by building some enormous, massive, global, company-wide program. You can start small and scale, and you can maybe you start out with just, building an e-learning program for one aspect of your business. You're going to start with sales training. You're going to start with customer, whatever it is, employee training, some aspect of it. And then from there, you can grow it, you can scale it. Then maybe you start thinking about external use cases. But, I love this just as advice from you to, our prospective customers of you don't need to do it all right out of the gate, because then you're going to have those little frowny faces at the top of this slide.
Experiment. So each step is an experiment where you iterate and work with the customer to say, is this better? What do you want next? Is this better? Right? At every point, there's always value being driven in the fastest, shortest amount of time. And that's something that I think is really important to say, what can we do tomorrow? And that might be just go and read a book, right? Read the first 4 chapters. I will catch up with you on Friday, and then you can tell me what implications it's going to have for your job, right? even we've started the journey, even though it may take us another 3 weeks to actually get round to maybe even putting them on an external course if we wanted to, right? Maybe those things don't turn up. But thinking about what can you do now, and some of that going back to what we said earlier, so like just show me what a great sale looks like, right? Go back to your team, capture on video what a great sale looks like, what a great sales conversation looks like.
Yep.
That will start to drive so many things before you then have to say, everybody else, this is what great sales looks like, because they'll start to go through that process, and that conversation will start the learning even straight off the bat. So one of the things, just interesting things, is we did some survey last year of how people use a combination of off-the-shelf content, bespoke content, and user-generated content. So the orange is the off-the-shelf, the blue is the bespoke, the green is the user-generated content. And what's interesting, right, is no matter whether it was more generic skills around technology, health and safety, soft skills, diversity, inclusion, belonging, there's always a little bit of each one all the way. But the shift goes from, if it's more generic skills, actually off the shelf is a pretty good answer, through to when it's very bespoke to my organization, it's about your organization's culture, your business processes, your business products. There's still some opportunity to accelerate people on the way by saying, this is a generic introduction to broadband, right? Or it could be, this is fiber optics. Then in terms of what it means for our products, then maybe we can create some more bespoke work. But also within that, if we're the bleeding edge provider of that fiber technology, then actually we can use our user-generated content to push us in that direction. And some of this is the combination both of sharing knowledge, but also showing that you know, or, and this is a really important one, showing the advocacy, right? So capturing people who are in the flow saying, yeah, this is what I've been doing around diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging in my team, right? This is part of sharing learning and giving people permission to act sometimes as well. And that's the same for leadership. And it's you see a sort of pendulum swing. But I think really interesting is this sense of off the shelf can play a role all the way across. User-generated content helps you give the voice of the customer into that experience and drive advocacy and insight. And then bespoke plays across each one of these, where it's a matter of how do we get it done here? And some of the sort of blurring maybe across the bespoke and user-generated is something that maybe is it's not necessarily a clear separation. You can use both to help you get there.
Well, this is and this is exactly in line with what we see at Litmos as far as the off-the-shelf bars. And the first 7, starting from the left, the first 7 categories over through compliance and regulatory, those are our top off-the-shelf, or among our top off-the-shelf categories or collections that people access in the Litmos content library, because it's like, well, why would you build, some of the like soft skills, health and well-being is huge in our library, DE&I, the leadership and management, I know we're going to talk about that, compliance. Why in the world would you take the time to build your own compliance courses when you can just get it? And given that we're talking in this session today about, limited resources, potential hiring freezes, potential having fewer people, you need to maximize your effectiveness as an L&D team or as someone who's, heading training in whatever fashion. So if you can just buy some of this stuff, just buy it, and I'm not trying to be salesy from Litmos. I'm not a salesperson, but to me, it's just sort of obvious. Like, of course, some of these categories are going to be among the ones that you're not going to spend your time or your resources time, when the ones on the right side, those you have to build the beast, but where the blue lines get really high, you have to build that because no one else can do it for you. So anyway,
and the overlap, I think, is really key as well, because it sort of gets to that point of, yes, we can show people how to use Microsoft Word, for example, and people are used to type. But then in the context of legal, what does it mean to track changes and how we do about our legal document tracking? You can create some of your own content, and maybe some of that creation is also part of your user-generated content. Say, this is how we do it here. This is why we use this. This is the process we follow. So these things sort of start to come together. But what I want to do is really quickly just go through some sort of top topics that I think it's worth you sort of maybe picking up in terms of more efficient and effective learning. The first one is think about spaced learning. We know that people have forgetting curves. So do explore space learning. That means micro learning. It means spacing out the journey so that you have a little bit of content, you have a catch up with a peer, you maybe speak to your manager, you touch in with an expert, you try it in the workplace, you write up your notes, a learning journal. So think about the touch points over a period of time. Think about micro learning and that's just like provide a short chunk on an ongoing basis just to keep people's product knowledge up to scratch, for example. Only takes 2 or 3 minutes, but it's just that constant top up which keeps the brain fresh and keeps the knowledge in mind. Also think about adaptive learning, and this maybe has some overlays into micro learning, right? So how can we target the learning better to individuals? And that could be based around their skills, it could be based around what they already know, it could be related to their role, but helping people navigate to the thing that will really help them is really important. And then adapting the course depending on how well they're getting it is really important. Well, we're seeing evolutions from people using decision trees into creating rules that say, well, if you've scored this amount on an assessment, then we recommend this, into AI starting to say, well, I've asked you these sorts of questions, then therefore I know I need to now offer you this deeper insight or this deeper level of expertise, and I'll target that at you. And if you don't get on well with that, I'll offer you maybe a simpler view and adapt that in a dynamic way. So those are two areas that I'd really recommend. They sort of speak to some of the efficiency and effectiveness. Also, just think about immersive learning, and there's some really interesting things about people starting to explore some of that metaverse, some of that virtual world. And there's a really nice report, and we've included the link in the deck, from PwC, who tried this around some of their training around implicit bias. The interesting thing is the results, right? And I'll just pick out 4 of these things here. People were 3 times more confident to act on what they'd learned after training because they'd gone through a more immersive virtual experience. They said that the learning was 4 times faster than classroom training. Yeah, it was 4 times more focused from people than traditional learning, and almost 4 times more emotionally connecting to learners than the classroom content, right? So this immersion, just because it maybe takes a little bit more investment, can provide some additional payback for you as a learning team. So it's not always about doing things cheaper, it is about doing the better occasionally as well, on the right sort of topics in the right sort of world, knowing that actually it's faster and more effective and creates better outcomes. Other things, just exploring the sense of learning in the workplace. I think we're seeing a lot of that from people trying to think how they connect into Microsoft Teams. But I think a better way to think about this is, how can I help people learn through work? How can I support better search? How can I support better mentoring? How can I support better coaching in the workplace? When people are doing their work, not just provide them with data and information and little courselets, but helping them connect and get input from others. Think about maybe some of that project-based learning. That's an important area as well. But I think, and as we sort of said right at the beginning, one of the key areas is just thinking a little bit about how important skills are. And again, just reconnect us with those CEO priorities of, yeah, I want to get greater automation, but I'm really worried about the future skills availability within our organization. And I think what would really recommend to you is think about, as a learning function, reaching out to your HR team. Understand what they are doing with skills through their HR platform, potentially through their talent platform. But there's some really interesting advances that are helping organizations understand the gap between the direction of the organization and the skills availability within their existing team, the skills adjacencies, what skills I'm almost close enough to having to enable me to do the future of work, but those which actually we've got bigger gaps that need more proactive learning around. But this is being driven by AI, almost sort of looking in the background on, do we understand through self-assessments and our profiling people what skills they have? Are we able to connect people to future work based around their priorities around goals? Can we target learning at them to help them be pulled through from the roles that maybe are going to be redundant in the future to the ones that are in demand for us in the future? And this is what many organizations were starting to do from about 2015, 2016. It accelerated through the pandemic, and it seems to be the sort of direction where people are thinking about skills-based organization. So do look at skills-based organizations, do think about how that sort of campaign, which has really been driven a lot by talent mobility, and how that might affect you as well. And so this sort of sense of how do you connect learning into this sort of web of people. So getting feedback from managers, getting motivation because they're connected to their future, thinking about development planning, trying to get this development culture going of actually we try and create space or create priority for people around their goals for developing. Think about their strategic learning outputs, which maybe connect them with a future job, help them understand things that will help them through their operational learning. So help them achieve higher performance because they maybe know more about our products or services or particular techniques that help them sell better. Try and sort of put it together because each one of these is almost part of a cog that powers the engine of organizational outcomes and organizational performance. It drives learning consumption if you can get some of these things right. But we know that those sort of skills are changing. We know that people's expectations are changing as well. This is an interesting piece of research from a lady called Dr. Eliza Philby, and she was doing some surveys of what matters most to Gen Z in the workplace. And what I love about each one of these things is I'm not a Gen Zer by any stretch of the imagination. You can tell by the color of my long white beard that actually I'm not a Gen Z by any stretch of imagination. But every time I go through the list, right, from 1 to 5, I'm thinking, do work that they love. I want to do work that I love. That's something I want. Have access to developing learning opportunities. I want access to learning development opportunities. So that's true for me. Work for a great manager, right? I want to work for a great manager. Who doesn't want to work for a great manager? And then have clear defined career path. I'd like a career path, right? I always want to know what's going to be happening next. World's moving fast. And autonomy to make the decisions. Now, lots of these things are wrapped up in the manager experience. So we do have to take not only the technical skills, we have to take the manager with us, but anything we do for Gen Z, we are doing for the rest of the workforce, right? I can't think of anybody in this room who's probably thinking, I don't want any of these. So whilst they're digital natives, as Dr. Eliza Philby says, they are more than any other generation want some face-to-face communication, and they want that personalized service and leadership. That's what drives them. I think I still want that too, right? And I'm a remote worker, grey beard as well. But also we're seeing some great innovation that's happening more broadly around how people use AI. ChatGPT is in the headlines. Google have just released their Bard. These images on the screen were created by AI because I just typed in, give me a female team leader who is talking in a contact center in the style of Van Gogh, right? That's what the AI created for me, right? Wow. It wasn't so successful in providing me with a robotics performance support in the street, but it's still learning. So we can think about how we create resources. We can think about how that's changing. But I think overall, if you think about this, right, if you've got the right mindset and you're focused on the right challenges, you will make amazing things happen. And I think that's my sort of final ray of sunshine for you. There is so much opportunity out there. There is so much resources. You'll be surprised by the funding that will be released if you're talking to the right people. So get out there, I think, is probably my message. And that's what I'm going to wrap up. I think we're 2 minutes away. I feel guilty because we haven't left much time for conversations, but some great input from Mark and both Marks.
Yeah, we have two different Marks, one of whom we know well, but at Litmos. But just to, because we are just up against time, but just to, I assume everybody, well, yeah, everyone can see the chats, but just to comment on those last two comments from two different Marks. The idea of, and you've been beating this drum, David, but the idea of like helping senior leaders see the ROI, and that's what we've been talking about, and see the value and being able to articulate the value is really what one of the things that we're talking about getting fit for the future, getting fit for 2023. That's a key. I think that's a key takeaway of this is being able to articulate that. And I know, again, this has been something that has been a challenge for a lot of L&D people that are, that's not their favorite thing to do, but it's something that you probably need to do, or at least figure out someone on your team who's willing to do it, to articulate that value up. And then another comment here is, becoming an integral partner to help deliver these transformational initiatives, and that the strategic importance, and there's so much overlap in the idea of strategic importance and ROI to the organization, and that these are just key things that now are going to become part or are already part of an L&D leader's role, but they just seem to be rising to the surface even more.
Exactly. I don't think I couldn't say it.
Well, great. We are right up against the hour, and I'm going to go ahead and just thank everybody, especially Mr. David Perring, and Fosway Group, and just thank you so much. And we always appreciate your work and your insights that you share with us and with the Litmos community. And of course, the information here, feel free to contact us, hit up our social sites, and we're always here as partners. And as we're talking about, anybody that needs some advice on getting started with e-learning and all of that, we're here, and we are very consultative as an organization. So, David, any closing remarks? I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much. The team will make sure that everybody who attended will be sent a copy of the slide decks, and that'll have all the hyperlinks and things in it. But just to thank everybody for being part of the session today. I hope you found something useful out of it.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Sam. That was brilliant.
Oh, good.